The Balanced Scorecard is also another modern day approach of assessing management. This was derived in the 1980s by a couple of researchers up in the Boston area, Robert Cooper and Robert Kaplan, which were in part responsible for the surgence of activity-based costing as well. Let's think about just a scorecard in general. If you go and play miniature golf, you'll have a scorecard and you will track your performance on those individual holes. But that is just one number that you're tracking. Rather simple. Let's consider alternatively preparing a scorecard for a baseball game. Again, we are tracking the number of balls that are thrown, the number of hits, the number of runs, several items of data here as well. But if you've ever seen anybody keep score in a baseball game, or even in a softball game for that matter, you will note that each individual player that comes to bat will be tracked specifically in terms of how many strikes, how many fouls. If the batter did get a hit, how far along in the bases did the individual progress? First, second, third, or did it make it all the way around? Lots of data. For the pitchers, we're looking at how many strikeouts, how many hits that we received, how many walks. Lots of data is being tracked on that scorecard. So it's not just in miniature golf, just that one ball. In baseball, it's a lot of things. Now, let's keep this analogy and go to a business. For years, the scorecard of a business was the income statement. Just financial data. And of course, it does tell you if you're doing well, profiting, or not, making losses. But this is a rather narrow way to assess operations, because there are far more important things involved other than just a dollar amount. And so the Balanced Scorecard was designed to compensate for those other areas. There are 4 dimensions in the traditional Balanced Scorecard, the first being a financial dimension. These are the traditional accounting measures that you would think of: an income statement, a balance sheet, some reports that we do that just track dollars, like a cost of goods manufactured statement. Traditional, historical accounting data. But that is just one area. The second area is called the customer dimension, and this is a non-financial measure. In other words, we're trying to determine, what does the customer feel or perceive about our product? How do we serve them? Do they like us? Do they not? What would they like better? What keeps them returning to us? The customer dimension. If we ignore the customer, then there's not going to be much of a financial dimension to consider. So incorporating the customer is quite important. And we can analyze this in terms of, say, surveys. You can analyze those numbers from a statistical proceeding to see if it is good or bad. You can just interview individuals for statements, maybe ask them what they would like for us to do. So the customer is definitely important. The third one is called internal business processes. This is a specific process that a company does that provides value to customers. These are oftentimes referred to as core competencies. What do you do best? If we were going to talk about Walmart, Walmart's core competency would be low prices. If we think of the company Nordstrom, which is a department store, they have a policy that they will be the best in customer service. And they are good at it. All you have to do is go to a Nordstrom store and you will see the difference in any other department stores in which you have visited. That is their strength. It is the core competency. You should capitalize this and let it give you a competitive edge. But you cannot just sit on your laurels. You must continue to develop it and enhance it. Because if you don't, there is always a competitor out there who will mimic you and try and beat you at your own game. So you have to be vigilant to make sure that your core competency is a leading component. The fourth dimension is called learning and growth. In other words, how does a company improve itself? This could be through research and development. It could be through training. Different ways in which the company can make itself better. Together, these four dimensions make a traditional balanced scorecard. Since its introduction in the 1980s, many businesses have started to customize their scorecards so that it is more reflective of their business and operations. And it is not uncommon to see more than four of these traditional dimensions. You may have a fifth and a sixth. But they each are designed to measure a particular area of the business other than just a dollar amount. Now there are some cautions with this. Any performance measure in any of these categories up here that you select really need to be aligned with a company's strategy. We need to make sure that all your goals are congruent. These performance measures must also be understandable and controllable to a significant extent by those evaluated. That's that controllability principle we've talked about. Third, it should not have too many of these measures because it just makes it cumbersome. So we need to narrow the focus down to those that matter the most. Of course, our reports need to be timely as well. Otherwise, there's no point in coming up with all these extra dimensions if we're not going to use it in an appropriate frame of time, because the whole idea is we want to continuously improve. So the balanced scorecard, if we were actually to prepare one, would be quite labor intensive. It is the reason why we're not going to do one of these in class, just because of the time limitations. But I did want to give you a little bit better basis of what this represented, and these came in the form of the 2 article readings for the class. The first one was an academic study called Communicating and Controlling Strategy, an empirical study of the effectiveness of the balanced scorecard. In this study, the researchers looked at a company and they developed what was called a distributor balanced scorecard. The company wanted to improve its operations, make things more efficient, more profitable, and they came up with a scorecard with multiple dimensions and several measures on them, and basically told all of their distributors that they had to comply with it. Now, during the context of the reading, there were several quotes. Some liked it, some didn't. Some found that it was impossible for their business to achieve. Others thought that it was garbage because basically they didn't understand it. However, regardless of the complaints, there were several admissions by some of the distributors that said it did help us to focus on our operations better, and we are better for that as a result. Of course, the company realized they did make some mistakes when they created this balanced scorecard. Some of the measures that they developed just were not quite optimal and sometimes not appropriate. And so what the company did after the fact is they went back into their scorecard and they did modify it, making some of the measures a bit more understandable, a bit more concise, and definitely less voluminous. And they also took input from the different distributors. They did not do that the first time, and as we've already talked about in other topics, that oftentimes the individuals who know best are those that are actually doing it. And so if I don't ask for their opinions or input, I may be developing something that's not quite ideal or appropriate here. So we found good results in that study, albeit it could have been better if it had been designed with more appropriate focus. The second was implementing ABC and the Balanced Scorecard at the Methodist Publishing House. The Methodist Publishing House in the reading indicated that they were having declining sales in part of their business just because the demographics were changing, particularly with the Southern gospel music. And so the publishing house wanted to come up with a better way to manage its costs. And of course, the way to better manage your costs is to have better data. And so they went to an ABC approach, and they implemented it very well. They trained it. They had a champion in there. They got everyone to buy into it. And along the way, they realized that the Balanced Scorecard would also be quite useful, because it would allow them to focus on other dimensions, such as if our customer base is changing, we need to start focusing more on those individuals, hence the second dimension, and also how are we going to adapt to this? How are we going to learn and grow? So it was a perfect fit. And when they implemented this, they found that it was very successful because, again, they made sure to train everybody to understand what was going on, and as a result, they found it very favorable. So the Balanced Scorecard is a modern-day management approach that does allow businesses to assess its operations more than just these quantitative approaches such as return on investment, residual income. It gives us those additional dimensions that can be quite valuable.